Good morning.
Morning.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm up in Flagstaff, Arizona, where it's much
Yes.
cooler.
All
I
right.
remembered that.
All right. So
Nice to have a change of scene, I'm sure.
it is. I'm with my brother and a family. It's the first time I've been with people in a very long time. Nice. And Larry, where is that background?
That is over near Lake Elsinore last year when they had the poppy fields.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, I'm just trying to pull up your notes for today. I do a split screen.
Okay. Yeah, there you are, Michael. We got in. I'm not sure what happened, but they let us in.
There we go.
Okay. Yeah, the Minion ran late. We run on the same system.
Ah,
Someone was having too good a time praying. We couldn't get in.
What happened?
The Minion ran long.
Oh, we're on that Zoom link.
Yeah, they got carried away with their praying. They went into ecstasy and we couldn't get in.
That's, I guess they're doing ecstatic prayer now.
That's right.
Ecstatic.
In that way, you can sort of envision being somewhere as opposed to actually being there.
Right.
Hey, Mark. Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
hi, Michael.
Oh,
Good to see you.
Morning, Cyril. I hope you got the notes I sent.
yeah, I got it.
Mark, are you good?
Do I have the?
Co-host.
Let me just see. Yes, it says I'm a co-host. I'm good.
Okay. Wave
Go
or
to
something.
Abyssal Yiddish.
Are you, Michael, are you at the at the controls this morning?
Ich bin der Ballerboss.
Yeah, but I'll take. We don't do. I'll take that for now. We don't do all that much muting and unmuting in the course. We stay muted most of the time. I think I can do this.
And don't
Have a
throw
good
us,
class.
Thank you.
don't throw us into breakout rooms.
I don't know how you're safe.
Michael knows.
So I'm in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Flagstaff.
Yeah, my brother has a home up in Flagstaff, and it's about it. It actually was 51 degrees last night.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Yes.
Yeah, better than Phoenix.
Hey,
Well,
Michael.
I'm going back to Phoenix on Thursday, and it'll go up. It'll go up 40 degrees.
40 degrees, right. Flagstaff is nice.
Well, yeah, it'll be about 80 this afternoon, but 80 and dry is lovely.
Perfect.
Yep.
Are you going to
Yep.
Sedona?
No. I've been there many times, and it's Sedona's a little more touristy.
Yeah.
I like Flagstaff. It's small town. It's a little more relaxed.
Right.
So
It is a very interesting town. I guess it's between Flagstaff and Sedona, called Jerome. Have you ever been there? It's an old silver mining town, and it's up in the mountains.
okay.
Beautiful.
Well, Flagstaff is 8,000 feet up. I don't know what up in the mountains means.
That's high.
Yeah,
Where
that's
are you
why it's
going?
cooler.
Yeah.
Good morning. Good morning.
Mark,
Good
when are you-
morning.
Hi, Gina. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Oh, because I know you said you wanted chicken soup.
Oh, no, it just sounded good what Mark makes. I mean, what Michael makes.
Oh, are you asking him to make
Whatever.
chicken soup?
Spicy soup. Sounds good.
Oh,
All right. We'll wait another couple minutes. We'll get started.
Mark, when are you going to Arizona?
I am in Arizona.
Oh,
I'm
you're
in
in there.
Flagstaff.
Oh,
Yeah, I drove out here Thursday. I left 6 o'clock Thursday morning, and I got here sometime around 3 o'clock Friday afternoon.
Cool.
so you stayed overnight?
I did. I found a place. And I stayed. I brought my own blankets. I brought my own pillows. I washed everything down. I got a room where it hadn't been used in a couple days. Yeah.
What about food?
I brought my own food.
Oh, okay.
I took a cooler with me.
How long are you staying there?
Probably about 2.5 weeks. I'm going to do everything here I do at home.
Cool.
There's no change. It's just that I have some nice people around instead of living in an empty home.
Yeah, it's hard. It's getting old.
Hi, Sandra.
Where's your dog, Cantor? Did you take your dog with you?
I have a friend who stays with him while I'm away. I have to tell you, without the dog, I'd stay here longer, but I miss my pup. Yeah. All right. So we left off last week in the middle of the first paragraph of the Amidah. We're dealing with the paragraph known as Avot, which talks about God's role in history. And I want to pick up with the last few components of that, and then we'll go into the second paragraph, which is a whole different theme and a whole different understanding of God. So in the first paragraph, where I want to pick up is Zocher Chasdei Avot. It remembers God's deeds, his chesed, his actions of kindness towards the ancestors. That's what it's bringing up. And so what we do is we make the argument that we're turning to God and saying, take care of us. And this first argument essentially is saying, if not for our sake, for their sake. Remember our ancestors. Remember what grandma and grandpa did. They were cool people. All right. Give us a reward because they were good. We may miss the mark at times, but give us a break because they were wonderful. Moses turns to God and he asks him to remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. When Moses pleads with God not to destroy Israel on behalf of the golden calf. So that he makes several arguments, but one of his arguments is remember our ancestors. You made them a promise. You need to stick to it. All right. Now, what's important to note, and the rabbis were careful with this, is that it doesn't mean that you can do anything you want. You just turn to God and say, all right, well, just remember Abraham. He was a goodie. So I murdered 75 people, but that doesn't count. Okay. You still have to behave in certain ways. You have to behave according to Nachmanides, in ways in which the values of your ancestors are being reflected in order to use the that their relationship with God buys you. That's Nachmanides' argument, okay? So that's the first argument. Again, this is about our ancestry, and we're calling on God to remember the deeds of our ancestors as one of the arguments for including us in good stuff. The second one, it then goes on, it says, Umevi goel livnei b'neihem, and who brings redemption to their descendants, meaning us. What's that? Okay. Lema'an shemo. All right, I'm my bad, I forgot to mute. Hold on. I will do that. There we go. Okay. There we go. All right. Lema'an shemo, for the sake of God's name. All right, and the idea here is that, God will save us not because we merit it, but for the sake of his reputation. And this argument plays out at least two different places in the Torah. After God takes the Israelites out of Egypt, and again, they have the golden calf, the second argument that he makes, and I think you have this in your readings, it should say, I think it's reading number, if you destroyed, is that there? Okay, Sandra, would you unmute and read that for us?
If you destroy your people, what will the Egyptians and the other nations of the world say? They will say that you were strong enough to conquer the powers of Egyptian exile, but you were not strong enough to conquer the future kinds of the land of Israel. That is why you destroyed your people in the desert.
All right. Hey, God, if you blow it with us, everybody's going to think you didn't have the power to save us. That's Moses' argument, right? There's a level of chutzpah there, but it's Moses' argument. And in case you missed the argument in that case, it plays out again later. When the Jews are supposed to go into the land, they send out spies to look at the land. The spies check it out, and they report that there are giants there, that we will not be able to defeat them. We should not proceed to the land of Israel. That's their report. And basically, they show little faith in God. And according to the text, God is prepared to destroy them. But once again, Moses steps in and he says to them, the nations of the world would say that you weren't capable of bringing the Jews into the land of Egypt. They would say, because you weren't capable, you thought up a scheme so that you could get angry at the Jews and you could destroy them in the desert so that it wouldn't look bad for you. All right? Again, there's a lot of chutzpah to this argument. But he makes the argument twice, and he's saying to God, your reputation is on the line in terms of how we proceed. So you've got two arguments going on here. One is the first one is remember the deeds of our ancestors, and two is God, your reputation is on the line here in this process. So as we turn to God, we're saying to him, we may not merit your support, but here's at least two other reasons why you might want to consider Geula, redemption, nonetheless, despite the fact that we as a people fall short. Finishing up the blessing, it finishes up Baruch Atah Magen Avraham. There's a general rule that the bracha that you conclude with, in a sense, encompasses the most central theme of the prayer that it precedes. And that, in a sense, it's almost backwards because the bracha existed first, and then they built the paragraph around it, which would reflect that. But nonetheless, the outcome is the bracha reflects the theme of what was going on in sections before. And although, it's interesting, although the paragraph mentions Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and later in modern times we had the four mothers as well, it concludes by mentioning only Abraham. It doesn't mention Isaac and Jacob. It's Magen Avraham. Not Magen Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. It's just Magen Avraham. And essentially because the promise, the initial promise of the future of the Jewish people is made to Abraham. There's subsequent little extra things that are said to Isaac and Jacob. But if you look at the covenant and the relationship that is established in Genesis 15, and you have the chapter of where he cuts up the animals and walks between them, which is an ancient way of making a treaty, okay? You have here, God's part of this is to assure a permanent people of Israel. God promises that he would make Abraham into a great nation, bless him, make his name great, and that Abraham ve'yeh bracha, that he would be a blessing, all right? And so the blessing ends, in a sense, fulfilling this, that God will be that shield to protect and assure Abraham's descendants. All right? That's the first paragraph. Again, it is all about, it's called the Avot. Avot means fathers and or ancestors, okay? And it's all about God's role in history. One of the ways we understand our understanding of God and how it plays out is God's role in history. We can look back at the state of Israel and see it as a geopolitical experience, or one can see the hand of God in the formation of the state of Israel, and or something of some mixture thereon, somewhere along the continuum. All right? But if you choose, if you're engaged in prayer, the likelihood is you see God's hand in history on some level, and that's what this is addressing. So now let's go to the second bracha. The second bracha is fascinating. Fascinating. Ellen, would you, if you would unmute and read, it says, Your might, Adonai, that paragraph all the way to Master of Life and Death.
Your might, Adonai, is boundless. You give life to the dead. Great is your saving power. Your love sustains the living. Your great mercies give life to the dead. You support the falling, heal the ailing, free the fettered. Keep your faith with those who sleep in the dust. Whose power can compare with yours? You are master of life and death and deliverance. Faithful are you in giving life to the dead. Praised are you, Hashem, master of life and death.
All right, so they have cleaned it up. The translation here, they have cleaned it up and avoided in certain ways the central issue of what's being addressed. And I'll get to that in a second. This second blessing is called Givurot, powers. Gibor is strong, powers, okay? And it celebrates God's power in nature and in our lives. So the first blessing is recognizing God in history. The second blessing is recognizing God in nature, in the world around us, in our current world, the power of God. Did you have a question, Naomi? Oh, yes, okay. All right, so that's the major difference. And so the author of this bracha is essentially recognizing the world around him. I just sat in my brother's backyard back here, and I'm looking into the woods. And the wind there's a slight wind, and and there are moments in which you can be awestruck by nature. I had that moment when I drove through the Smoky Mountains where I literally got out of my car and said a bracha. I'd had the same experience when I went to Niagara Falls. For whatever reason, I went to the Grand Canyon. I didn't have that experience. I don't know why, but I didn't. But there are moments in life where you sort of step back and recognize, wow, there's a wow factor to what happens. And so the understanding in this paragraph is not only do those moments come along, but God has also placed in our world all that we need to sustain life. So food and water and clothing, and essentially the necessary elements of life all exist in our world. And if people are starving, it's a lack of sharing, a lack of distribution. But there is enough for everybody, and God has put it there. That's at least the rabbinic understanding of that they're trying to express here. Okay? And it's all a function. God doesn't owe us anything. It's an issue of God's chesed, God's loving kindness. Now, interesting when we talk about power among human beings, it's often defined in our ability to destroy. The most powerful nations, the most powerful people are those who can cause the most damage, potentially cause the loss of the greatest numbers of people, an ability to subdue, to imprison, to take freedom away from people. That is, and many of the gods in the ancient world, that was how they understood their gods. That's not what's being conveyed here. It's a complete opposite. God's power is described as upholding the fallen, healing the sick, freeing the slaves. So mechanoflim, rofei cholim, umatir asirim. And then ultimately, what is the ultimate expression from the rabbinic lens of God's power in the world? It is the ability, mechayei ametim, to return life to the dead. That would be the ultimate expression of power. All right? But we're called on to do two things. One is to recognize God in the ordinary, his power, and then ultimately in the magical. The birth of a child, all right, is almost a magical moment. It goes beyond the norm of seeing God in the normal cycle of things, okay? We are also called upon not only to recognize God's power, but to imitate God, imitatio Dei, all right, to imitate the actions of God. And this plays out in a number of ways. And first of all, freeing the slaves. If God frees the slaves, as he does with Egypt, it's our job to also do the same thing with prisoners and captives, to make sure. I'm not going to get into the politics of immigrants, all right? But one could make that argument here. By the way, there are other biblical sources where one could make the argument that that's not the way Jews respond. But here the argument would be free the enslaved, take care of those who are not free, and take care of them. Alternatively, this can also be understood in a couple other ways. One is going back to one of the blessings we did at the very beginning, that we are freed from the bonds of being bedridden. That when we sit up in the morning, for the person who is bedridden and can never sit up or never move, there's a sense of freedom to the ability to do that. So that's seeing God in the normal cycle of events and appreciating. There's also the concept of understanding this metaphorically, and that would be to release someone from intellectual or psychological bonds. If you're suffering from depression, one can understand that the power comes from that, or superstitious beliefs, or even ultimately prejudiced beliefs in our world today. One could understand that the freedom from prejudice could be, in a sense, a releasing of a prisoner, in a sense. The other thing I want to talk about with this is how else do we imitate God? And the ultimate way for us generally is we call it the chesed shel emet, is to take care of the deceased. All right, we take care of, when somebody dies, we're there to make sure that their bodies are taken care of properly. It's seen as the ultimate form of chesed, of kindness, because in almost everything else you do in life, when you do a kindness for somebody else, there's some potential you'll get something back. It may not be 100% altruistic. When you're doing something for the dead, I can promise you ain't getting anything. This is a one-way action. All right? There's nothing to be gained in process. And so the rabbis called that chesed, it's a chesed of truth. It's ultimate altruistic behavior. So the question comes up, in today's world, we see our world as it functions around us. All right? We know what happens in the lives of our loved ones. How can we earnestly say that God heals the sick and frees the captive? How can those words emerge from our mouth when we look around a world in which people die? All right, that there is suffering, that there is bondage, however you want to define it. A rabbi offers us a look, and it says the following: those who seek God in prayer and in their deeds will receive the strength to serve God further. Now, I want to tell you, there's obviously a lot of metaphor. I will tell you, when I applied to rabbinical school, I sat with Brad Artson. And he had been the rabbi, he was the dean of the rabbinical school, but he had been the rabbi in the congregation where I was serving at the time. All right, he went from that congregation to be the dean. And just at that moment, the congregation was going out of business. I mean, a lot of problems that led that way. Michael, you have something? Oh, I'm not sure which class he's in. All right. And I almost anticipated the question. He said to me, how do you explain the devastation of a congregation going out of business? Now, I'm going to tell you that I don't fully buy my answer, but I knew exactly what he was looking for. And I gave it to him, and he was satisfied. I think he knew I think he knew. But the answer I gave him, I see it in the strength of the people to help one another through this process. Okay? It is one rabbinic response. It does serve as helpful in certain ways. It's not a complete cure-all, that's for sure. You still have to deal with the suffering that goes on. But one of the rabbinic responses was to see the people's response to suffering of others, and they're stepping in and helping. Rabbi Teller here in Houston, when we had the flood, he made the statement, those whose homes have been destroyed are receiving, and those whose homes are intact are giving. That's what we do. We step up and we help. That would be one way to understand God as healing, as a source of healing. Alternatively, God is the source of knowledge, and it's our job to study and to learn to heal. And so medical research and doctors and nurses, in the weekday Amidah, the first request after the Kedusha says, that God gives us the wisdom and the understanding to survive in our world. And that ability to learn is a gift from God. And therefore, any doctors who heal, that is to be seen. Dogs don't heal one another. All right, Buddy just had surgery. None of his peers was going to do anything for him. Okay, all right. There's a wisdom that we have, and that our job is to discern the wisdom that exists out in the world, to use the God-given knowledge and understanding of our world to produce a place in which healing becomes possible. All right. Not a perfect answer. I'm telling you that, look, again, if I could solve all the world's problems in this class, I could retire tomorrow morning. I can't. All right. We then go back, I'm going to step back a little bit into the beginning of this blessing. Mashiv HaRuach Umorid HaGashem, who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall, okay, to descend. Again, think of when this is being written. This is being written in the rabbinic times. Their dependence on agriculture made them very dependent on rainfall. Again, for us, it doesn't rain and this year we don't get as many cherries, or whatever it is, we miss something, there's something in the supermarket, we have plenty to supplant it with, there's a joke in there, supplant, okay, to replace it with and eat something else. In their days, that wasn't the case. They raised their own food. And if it didn't rain, survival was not a guarantee, plain and simply. And so the rabbis included phrases in the liturgy such as this, who caused the wind to blow and the rain to fall. And where would it be natural to include such a place? In a blessing that talks about God's power over the world and nature. And so it fits here. It makes perfect sense. Now, I want to reflect a little bit on one other concept that I mentioned earlier. On Shabbat, the tradition is that we don't ask God for things. Right? We got rid of all the bakashot, all the middle 13 blessings, and we replaced them with one blessing about Mikadesh Shabbat, the sanctification of the Sabbath. What you have here is very subtle. We never ask God directly for rain or any of these things on Shabbat. What we do is we say, oh, by the way, you're the source of rain. By the way, you're the source of healing. You're the source of, we never go that next step, but we sort of imply it. All right. So there's no real request. It's you know, your parents knew when you wanted something. Or I remember my mom would say, gee, a cup of coffee sounds great. All right, well, I kind of knew what she was saying. Would you make me a cup of coffee? And it used to annoy the heck out of me that she wouldn't just ask me for the coffee, because I'm happy to make it, just ask me for it. All right, but gee, a cup of coffee sounds great. Well, that's kind of what's going on here. It's a subtle way around the lack of a request. Now I come to what is essentially, first of all, are there any questions or any comments? You can unmute. Anybody? Okay. Let's get into the fun stuff. This is the fun part of the paragraph. Michaye hametim. They keep translating it in a way that doesn't quite convey what's going on. Chai means life. Michaye is to cause life. It's a causative form, and metim are the dead. And so what you're talking about here is who causes life for the dead, who brings the dead back to life. All right? This is an essential question in almost every religion. All right? There's almost no religion that doesn't in some way address this. If people were absolutely sure that there was an afterlife, that was life after death, we'd probably behave a little differently. If it could be proven that there is no afterlife, we also might change our behaviors. Why not live it up? All right. It's that sort of not being 100% sure that kind of keeps us in this balance of things that we sort of work our way through life. But the entire question of morality, of reward punishment, why bad things happen to good people would be almost impossible to explain if we were absolutely sure that nothing existed beyond life. All right? The rabbis struggled with that. So I do want to open up, before I go into Jewish understandings, I want to open up the floor and ask people, what do you understand life after death to look like? And so I think I hit the button and you can unmute. There you go. Anybody?
I don't see any.
You don't see any?
I did life and that's it.
Okay, and I have a dear friend, a friend of mine who I taught with for many years, that is now out in Spain, and he would say to me, of course there's nothing. And by the way, if you had surgery, you've already experienced nothingness. It's not like sleeping. When they give you that, they put you to sleep for surgery, they say to you, count down. You usually don't get beyond 8. Whatever it is you get to, and the next moment of consciousness, surgery is over. No time has passed in your consciousness. It's not like sleep. So one can make that argument. What else?
Well,
Rejoin.
you have to assume that life is in a different form. It's life of the soul. It's a spiritual life, not a physical life in that body.
Okay, so one of the things is there's some sort of soul that continues beyond. Okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to come back to all this. Keep going. Anybody else?
I was going to say rejoining this spirit, the spirit that animates the world.
So some kind of reconnection with God on some level.
Right. However, I figure we won't know, and I don't want to hurry up to find out.
Right. Exactly. May God delay the answer to the question for a very long time.
You know, there are people who come into this life who seem to come in with previous knowledge of events or places, indicating that they've lived before. They've had another life.
So reincarnation.
Yeah, in a different body, different shell.
I will address that as we go. Good.
And some people, after really bad situation, like, I don't know, like almost death, describe being in a different place, like heaven. I don't know.
So I remember reading a book in my
description like this.
There was a book I read in my 20s called Life After Life, in which they have a whole series of near-death experiences, and they're described as, in a sense, hovering above the body and being able.
Yes.
There were people who are literally blind; they cannot see, who have a near-death experience and can describe the tie the doctor is wearing when they're hovering. Okay, we know that's out there. Right. So let me tell you in advance what I'm not going to give you as a definitive answer. If you came here expecting I was going to tell you what was happening after life and I could tell you for sure, I have some real major disappointment to share. Okay?
We don't want you to try and tell us.
All right. And I hope not to be able to give you a definitive answer, as I said, for a very long time. All right. So let's play a little bit with Jewish tradition. You're going to like some of it. You ain't going to like some of it. I'm telling you up front. So right now, where we are, like most major religions, Judaism emphatically does believe in an afterlife, but the character of that afterlife and that existence is unique to Judaism. In very broad strokes, at the end of days, at some ultimate time, okay? I'm going to give you a top 10. Here we go. Top 10. Number 1, the dead will be resurrected and come before God to account for their lives on earth. Okay, number 1. 2, that the righteous shall be rewarded and evil punished. 3, that Jews free from the yoke of exile will return to their homeland, rebuild Israel and Jerusalem, and become masters of their own destiny. All right, that's a whole story unto itself. 4, that they will rebuild the temple and reinstitute the temple cult. Now, I'm going to tell you conservative Judaism is not necessarily buying that one. 5, that the nations of the world will flock to study Torah with the Jewish people. 6, that peace and justice will rule. So that we're talking about not just immediate life after death, but ultimate life after death. We're sort of walking a range here. That the tensions that now pervade the world will disappear. Number 8, that the wolf shall dwell with the lamb. That's from Isaiah. My rabbi in Dallas used to say he has a perfect answer for that. You just get a new lamb every day. Okay. Number 9, that all people will come, this is the end of Aleinu, that all people will come to know and worship the God of Israel. And number 10, the entire scenario will be brought to pass through the initiative of some charismatic figure that we call the Mashiach, literally the anointed one. Yes, thank you, I can do that, my bad. There we go. All right. So anytime you have some questions, the first place you turn is the Bible. The Bible is the starting point for all discussions. We then will look at rabbinics, and we'll go through there from this. You are going to hate the biblical understanding. I'm telling you that up front. You're going to prefer the rabbinic. You're going to hate the biblical understanding. The most common biblical name for the land of deepest gloom, as it's described, where Job anticipates going after his death, is Sheol. This term appears throughout the biblical text. It is the netherworld. It's the bowels of the earth. It's the pit. It is a limit of human awareness. It's a metaphor for God's ultimate mystery. God says to Job, would you discover the mystery of God? Would you just have discovered the limits of the Almighty? Higher than heaven, what can you know? Deeper than Sheol, what can you do? The Bible and then goes on and it describes what Sheol is. Its gates and its bars make escape impossible. It is a monster with gaping jaws that aggressively devours all men and is never sated. It is a place of maggots and decay. To claim that somebody goes down into Sheol is to say that they descend to the bowels of the earth beyond any human awareness. A biblical understanding says that once you die, you not only lose connection with the living, you lose connection with any other inhabitants of the netherworld, you lose connection with God. There is no awareness. It no mean, in a sense, it's exactly what you said. There is no existence. And by the way, Sheol doesn't discriminate between good and bad, because even Jacob goes to Sheol. So the biblical understanding is that there is a non-existence. When it says you lie with your fathers, it literally means non-existence. That is the Bible's testimony. Now, there's one text when you say that people sometimes will use as to support the idea of resurrection and say that this idea was in biblical times, not rabbinic. And that's the vision in Ezekiel of the dry bones. And in that text, you have the prophet describing dry bones that are clothed with flesh, that are infused with breath and are brought back to life. But the key to understanding that passage lies in God's own interpretation in the Bible, in Ezekiel. I think you have this in your text. Jeff, do you have, it says, "O mortal," and is Ezekiel.
O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up. Our hope is gone. We are doomed. Prophesy, therefore, and say to them, thus says the Lord God, I am going to open your graves and life you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel.
I probably should say something like raise you out of the graves. That's a typo. It's me. That's me. So what God himself is droshing here. And he's telling you that this rising of the bones is a metaphor for the national regeneration of Israel, for the country, for God's people to bring the people out of Babylonia. That this rising is to redeem them from slavery, now from exile, and to return them to their homeland. It's a political statement, not a prophecy of bodily resurrection. All right? And to take it as anything more than that is to take it out of context because you want to. All right? So the Bible itself, that's not the ultimate place we're going, but the Bible's perspective is there really is no life after death. Now, why does the Bible insist on that? Okay, it obviously reasons, most of what's going on, there's reasons in the Bible. The first is that the Bible has this injunction constantly against imitating the idolatrous practices of the surrounding pagan nations. One nation in particular, Egypt. Okay, they have come out of Egypt. Egypt has come to represent the ultimate evils of behavior. Egyptians were very hung up on life after death. Very much so. When somebody died, they not only buried the person, they gave him all his possessions and buried him with him, And unfortunately, if his wife wasn't dead, they buried her anyway. You took everything with you because you're going to need it in the afterlife. And so one of the reasons for the biblical insistence on no afterlife is to say, don't be like the Egyptians, the pagans. The second answer comes down to a sharp demarcation between God and human beings, that only God is eternal. And that's conveyed in a number of ways in terms of biblical thought. They believed in the ancient world that if you could live to 1,000 years, you would be eternal. And as a result, if you look in the stories of Genesis, in the early stories, the person who lives the longest life, Methuselah, or we translate it as Methuselah, how long does Methuselah live? 990 years. It's not an accident. They were conveying a message that life is not eternal. Only God is eternal. So that's the biblical understanding. Again, that's not where we're finishing. That's the Bible's understanding. We look there first. As the biblical age draws to a close, and Al, this is going to address some of the things you said as well, two doctrines enter Jewish writings and overturn the biblical belief. The first is that at some future point, God will raise at least some human bodies from their graves. Okay, this idea of resurrection. The second, and this is a brand new idea, okay, is that the human body may be mortal, but we own a soul. The whole idea of a soul is not biblical. There are no souls in the Bible. When the Bible uses the word nephesh, it's referring to a life, that there were 70 nefashot, there were 70 lives. The Bible's translation of the word nephesh is not soul. There are no souls in existence in biblical times. It comes about at a post-biblical times, all right? And these two concepts of resurrection and the existence of a soul ultimately merge and form a Jewish doctrine of the afterlife that essentially becomes canonical for Jews. This is the canon. You have to believe in this. Maimonides, it became one of his principles. We sing Maimonides this phrase when we sing Yigdal. Meitim Yichayel Beroch Hasto. The dead, God revives the dead, restores the life of all the souls, Beroch Hasto, in great kindness. Baruch Adei Ad Shem Tehilato, and may God be praised forever. It became so basic to Jewish understanding that Maimonides made it one of the things that you could not reject, and said, who gets denied the life after death? Those who don't believe in life after death. It's a little circular to be at best. So where does this concept come from? If the Bible says there is no soul and there is no life after death, how is it that it is so central, that you have to? What is about? Both of them, nishama, it's life. They're different terms for the neshamot and nefesh are terms for life. You say 70 souls, you're talking about, that's how the Bible describes the 70 who went down into Egypt as nefesh. They were 70 souls. Those are Jacob's descendants, but they're the people who are living. All right, they're not souls. All right. So where does this come from then? That's the question. You have to understand, okay, the Babylonians conquer the Assyrians, the Babylonians then conquer the Jews and destroy the temple, and they exile the Jews to Babylonia. Who conquers the Babylonians? The Persians. Okay, and so we have stories. Cyrus rebuilds the temple. He gives permission to rebuild the temple. He gives people the opportunity to live their lives as they see fit. His approach is let people be, and they'll be loyal. Just stay loyal, and we'll leave you alone. And we know that these two ideas are Persian. who are the Jews living amongst in the 300 to 400 years before the Common Era, before Alexander the Great defeats the Persians in 323 and takes over Israel in 323? It is among the Persians. These ideas are they believe in dualism. They believe in a God of light and a God of darkness. And they believe in the punishment and reward. And they believe in the afterlife where all that is possible. And therefore you need to have a soul for all that to exist beyond. It is Persian belief. And the Jews adopt it. Okay? They buy into it for sure. By the way, it's not an accident that Christianity, which comes out of Judaism 400 years later as well, after Persian influence, took it to the nth degree and created heaven and hell. Because it's after a period in which the people bought this concept from the Persians. All right? We know that from Zoroastrian texts, which a lot of it is Persian, that these kind of thinking existed from the 9th to the 2nd century before the Common Era. So life after death does not emerge from the Bible, but from the culture in which the Jews lived in post-biblical times. Okay? I told you weren't going to like the biblical version. We like the rabbinic version far better. Now, so if I'm a traditionalist, I'm going to say to you, equally conceivable is these ideas are not culturally borrowed, but it developed internally through the natural development of ideas. Okay, so here would be the argument. If, in fact, God created the world and the humanity in the first place, God is the creator, Yotzer Bereshit, okay? If God is the ultimate power, whose ultimate force, whose power extends over all of history and nature, that's what we've just been talking about in the Amidah, if God can send Israel, an entire nation, into exile and then redeem it again, if God can renew the natural cycle every year, if God can, as Isaiah 66 promises, create a new heaven and earth, here comes the if-then, then why can't God raise people, human beings, from the grave? What kind of limitation on God is that? Why can't God, in the words of Isaiah 25, destroy death? Why is there an assumption that death is more powerful than God? Why should God's power over one's fate end with death? Okay, those are the logical thens if you accept the ifs. And the rabbis canonized this concept by including it into the Gevurot of the Amidah. And by the way, in this one paragraph that we just read, the concept of resurrection is mentioned 5 times. Okay? And it is the concluding, again, the bracha at the end. What is a blessing about God's powers? What is the concluding statement? Mechayei hametim. God is the resurrector of life from death. Now, I also want to point out, in addition to the theology, I want to bring a little history here. This is Pharisaic thought. The rabbis bought this fully. It was not necessarily all of Judaism's thinking at that time. We know that the Essenes believed fully in predetermination. There is no reward and punishment. There's no need for an afterlife. Everything in the universe is predetermined. Okay? We know that the Sadducees believed that everything was choice. There's no God's not involved in the day-to-day, etc. We do our own thing. We reap the rewards and punishments of our actions in this life. And there's no providence. God is not involved in the day-to-day. It's the Pharisees who, at the end of the day, sort of blended the two. That we have choice, but God is involved. Now, as is the case in many, when there's conflict of ideas, this is truly my belief in history. Most ideas, when they're in controversy, are not determined by the marketplace of ideas and a battle. Most of the time, it is defined by who survives. The victor makes the choice. The Sadducees disappear. The Essenes disappear. It is not that the Pharisaic idea was better. They survived. And so that's the Judaism with which we live today. We live with the Pharisaic thought. All right. That takes care of Mechayeh Mitim. By the way, I also want to point out that in the Reform movement, if you've been to a Reform service, you will notice they get rid of this language. Mechayeh Mitim has been removed from the second paragraph of the Amidah. Mechayeh, who causes life, who gives life, Hametim, to the dead, has been replaced by Mechayeh Hakol, who gives life to everything. God becomes the source of life. There's no acceptance of a resurrection in that model. It's just God is the source of life. And by changing one word, they change the context and they change the concept of what's being said. Look at what the conservative movement did. They just sort of reshaped the translation. They kind of buy the idea, but couch it. All right, they couch what's going on here and don't directly address it. One of my favorite debates I ever attended was between Neil Gilman, who was the professor theological professor at the seminary, and Elliot Dorff, who was the theological professor at the UJ, and they're dear friends. And they had this great argument over the concept of resurrection. Neil Gilman wrote a book called The Death of Death. And he talks about resurrection. Elliot Dorff wants no part of this. He thinks that's just fantasy land. It's a metaphor. And it was a great debate. So if our two theologians in our own movement, our two top theologians are in debate about it, we couch things. That's what we do. We couch. All right? Reform movement, get rid of it. Orthodox, fully buying it. Conservative movement, it's sort of, we're not exactly sure. All right. Or we accept all ideas and we're open to how this will proceed. Depends on how you want to frame it. I want to now come to the other idea that Al raised, and that's reincarnation. Reincarnation is the idea that a soul now residing in a particular body may have resided in a previous body at an earlier period of time. And the purpose of reincarnation is seen as a chance for a soul to achieve a goal that it wasn't able to achieve in a previous life, and to reward and punish behaviors in previous lives, okay? For example, just a very basic example, a rich man who abused his powers, I can't think of any examples of that at all, may come back as poor. Okay, that would be the concept of reincarnation. And, to take it to a further, I don't necessarily buy reincarnation, so I'm giving you this. I'm giving you my own slant before I start. Okay. One could say that you have a child that behaves like an animal. Guess what they were in the previous life? An animal. A woman who can't conceive was a man in a previous life. To me, it trivializes certain things. But nonetheless, you'll see as it exists in the Kabbalah and Zohar, it is accepted within elements of Judaism and totally rejected in others, okay? The Jewish understanding of reincarnation, however, is different than Buddhist doctrine. Buddhist doctrine believes that things are fatalistic, that it's just going to continue the way it is. That's the belief of the Essenes. The Pharisees did not buy that. And so in a Jewish understanding, there is a power to moral decisions one makes, that you have free choice in every step of the way. And if you believe in reincarnation, that's one of the ways in which it would play out. There's a reward and punishment that ultimately comes about. If you otherwise, how unfair would it be for God to make demands of us, and if there were no rewards and punishments, would be the argument. That said, there are no references to reincarnation anywhere in the Bible or the Talmud. None. So we're talking about at least through the 5th century of the Common Era, when the Babylonian Talmud is completed. This idea is reincarnation is unknown to Jewish living. By the 8th century CE, we see it's adopted by the Karaites. Now, the Karaites were Jews, and there's still, by the way, apparently there's a Karaite community in San Francisco. I'm fascinated by that there's still Karaites alive. The Karaites were Jews who believed in the Bible only and none of the rabbinic thought. When it says in the Bible, don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. Lo tivashel b'gedi b'chalevi mo. Don't boil a kid in its mother's milk. That's what it means. It doesn't mean don't mix meat and milk. That's nourishkeit. That's rabbinic. It means don't take a baby kid and put it in its mother's milk. Take it literally. That's what it means. That's a Karaite understanding. We as Jews today are not biblical Jews. We are rabbinic Jews. We understand the Bible through the lens of the rabbis. What they understood it to mean is what it means. Karaites completely disagree. All right. It is possible, though, that we know that what's the time period there? They're living under Islamic control, and Islamic mysticism has an element of reincarnation. So once again, with resurrection, we see the influence of the Persians. With reincarnation, we see the influence of the Islamic mystics. Okay? We have always borrowed from the cultures around us. That is not a new concept. The earliest non-Karaite, in other words, rabbinic character, who mentions this doctrine of reincarnation is Saadia Gaon, somewhere in the area of the early 900s. Now, Saadia Gaon is a major scholar, and his works are, if you took any of the Melton history course, you know he produced a number of takanot, of rulings that were very practical for the people to be able to survive. All right, Saadia writes, okay, let's see, Gina, do you have the text? Okay. Gloria, do you have the text? No. Okay. Lori, do you? Right. I'm striking out. Sarah, do you have the text?
It's not on the text.
You don't have Saadia writes?
Nope, it ends with Ezekiel.
Okay. Then I guess I'll read it. Kidneys. All right. Saadia says, I must say that I have found certain people who call themselves Jews professing the doctrine of metempsychosis, which is designated by them as the theory of the transmigration of souls. What they mean thereby is that the spirit of Reuben is transferred to Simeon, and afterwards to Levi, and after that to Judah. They're just, by the way, there's nobody in particular. It's sort of like Tom, Dick, and Harry. They're generic names, okay? Many of them would have even gone so far as to assert that the spirit of a human being might enter into a body or a beast, or the body or spirit of a beast into that of a human being, and other such nonsense and stupidities. Now, clearly, he's not buying it, but he's recognizing that it's out there. So we know that within the Jewish world it exists by the 900s. We also, in other of his writings here, learn incidentally that one of the reasons that the Jews and other people around them were coming to believe in reincarnation was because of the theological difficulties in God allowing little children to suffer. They were making sense of their world in the best way they could. All right. And if a child suffers, it must be because of a sin in a previous existence. Again, I'm not buying, I've told you my bias. I'm not buying that. Doesn't mean it's not legitimate. There's another midrash that says that every Jew, and this one I'm sure many of you have heard, every Jew to ever live, whoever will live, stood at Mount Sinai and received the covenant from God. All the laws came from God, and ladies and gentlemen, you were there. It sounds like a TV show. Reincarnation conceptually explains how this midrash could have an element of truth to it. Okay? Doesn't make it true, but it's a rabbinic struggle. Okay? Let's talk about some of the other scholars over the centuries and how they responded to this. Medieval thinkers, Judah Halevi, Maimonides, neither of them makes any mention at all of reincarnation. The Kabbalists, however, did, and they believe in reincarnation. The Zohar refers to it in a number of passages. Nachmanides, in his commentary to the book of Job, speaks of reincarnation as a great mystery and a key to understanding other biblical paragraphs. The later Kabbalah following up on the Zohar, is full of the belief in the transmigration. It's full of it, transmigration of souls. And they would say to you that the heroes of the Bible and later Jewish histories are said to be reincarnations of earlier biblical characters. So, for example, the soul of Cain, who kills Abel, enters the body of Jethro. This is Kabbalistic. And the soul of Abel, who is killed by Cain, enters the body of Moses. And when Moses and Jethro meet in friendship, there's a solving. They rectify the sin caused by the estrangement between the two brothers. Now, I'm going to take that metaphorically. They were not. Right? The Hasidim today believe explicitly in this doctrine. And the tales are told of Hasidic masters who remembered their activities in previous incarnations. Right? So among the Hasidim, this is a core belief. Most modern Jews today are not buying this. Okay? For the majority, the doctrine has had its day and is believed by very few, although, you need to hear this, most Orthodox Jews, mitnagdim, those who are not Hasidim, which is the great majority of Orthodox Jews, they find themselves in this sort of, remember how I said conservative Jews couch it? That's what they're doing with this doctrine. They won't positively denounce it, but they're not sure what to do with it. This is a perfect example, by the way, of how precarious it is to attempt to see Judaism in monolithic terms. You have a doctrine here that is rejected as a foreign importation by such a notable thinker as Saja Gaon. It is completely rejected by Saja. It is ignored by Maimonides, and he's just silent on it. And for the Kabbalists, it is revealed truth. All right. So I started by saying to you, I didn't have an answer here. I told you you weren't going to like the biblical understanding of maggots and decay and Sheol. And then we went through resurrection. We went through understandings of the ultimate end of days, and we've gone through reincarnation. We've discussed how these ideas are probably imports from the customs in which the Hasidim do believe in reincarnation, yes. That they're imports from the cultures that surrounded us at different moments in time. And at the end of the day, what are they in reality? They are struggles with making meaning out of life. Right? I struggle with the idea. I've always struggled with this idea a lot. I won't say to you that I believe in a life after death, but I must tell you that when my mom died, it shifted for me. Because I have to live a life in which I believe I will see her again. And I've made up my mind that I do. And if I'm wrong, so be it. I won't see her. But I'll be dead, so it won't matter. Okay. That's how I'm dealing with it. I recognize the word couching here is very important in this whole discussion. I've couched the whole thing. Yes, the Rebbe himself. And do they believe in reincarnation? For sure. They believe the Rebbe's coming back. All right, so I'm going to open it up for questions. Let me see if I can do this. Let's unmute everybody. I'll ask all to unmute. Okay, and I'm opening it for questions with qualified couched answers to follow.
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment. After my daughter died, I was sent a book by Simcha Raphael Paul. It's basically saying that any belief about afterlife can be found in Judaism.
Who says this?
I can't remember. I think it's Simcha Raphael Paul, but he has a book.
Yeah. In his he wrote a compendium. Yeah, it's a huge book on life after death. Yes.
Every single belief you ever found can be found there. I just thought that was extremely cool.
Yeah, and Alan, you're right. There's a sense of the Spirit of God among Hasidim continues to live in Israel. Yes, Suzanne.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
After my mother died, I remember one night, being asleep I don't know if I was asleep or awake or anything, but physically felt that my mother was there. And at this point, I did not know anything at all about Jewish beliefs in the afterlife. I've really only recently learned that. So I guess my question is...
Yeah, I'm not in trouble here at all. Go ahead.
My question is, seeing my mother that way, would that be a manifestation of the afterlife?
Yeah, look, it is absolutely possible. I don't talk about this a lot, but I'm going to tell you that about 7 months after my mom passed, I did have a dream that was tangibly different than any other dream I have ever had. In a way in which I interacted with my mom that was different than normal dreams. I can't tell you what that is. Can I say to you, can that be, Freud can say to you, that's wishful thinking. Sure, is that possible? Are there other realms of existence? I would say to you, why not? Can I prove them? Not a chance. Anybody else?
Yeah, you can ask, what is a memory? Perhaps that memory, intangible as it may be, is the spirit of the person who died.
Mm-hmm. That good. Yep. All of us. This is not an inconsequential question. This is a question that gets at the very purpose of life and our best ability to make sense of it. And we all struggle with it. And the reality is, if any religion had an absolute proof of what they were saying, we would have all converted to that religion tomorrow morning. Well, we couldn't have done it tomorrow morning because that would be past tense. All right? But we would have all bought it and gone there. No religion has the ultimate answer because, as we've all said, none of us have come back.
Okay.
Yes.
How do the rabbis interpret when Saul tries to consult with the witch of Endor to speak to the spirit of Samuel? How do the rabbis interpret that? Because he actually, there's some communication that occurs.
The witches of Endor, yeah. Nothing fits a nice little neat package, does it? I don't have an absolute answer. I can tell you the same rabbis who dealt with this then turn around and forbid any kind of witchcraft. All right. And so there's a sense in that statement of condescension of the whole process. You have, even in the story itself, the soul of Saul being extremely angry at being awoken. So I'm not sure. I don't know that there's a definitive answer to your question. Nothing fits into a nice, neat, tidy package.
But do the rabbis comment about it?
They do. They do. And what you're going to find, Jeff, is that there's no one answer amongst the rabbis. They're not happy about it. And so they don't. Some will get to a metaphoric understanding. Some will say this is a tragedy. It should never have happened. It doesn't. And others will just. They don't agree. Then again, the rabbis didn't agree on anything. That's what the Talmud's about. This rabbi says this. This rabbi says that. This rabbi says you're a jerk. And that rabbi says, well, you're not such a bright person yourself, right? That's what the Talmud's about. Anybody else? All right. From nice, cool Flagstaff, I send everybody a hello. The most compelling thing I ever read about was Life of Death, Proof of Heaven by Dr. M.K. Yeah, that's exact. Yes, Sandra, I've as I said, I read a book years ago, Life After Life. You see doctors who are writing these stories for sure. That's why I'm not ready to sit here and say to you there aren't alternative existences. I can't make that statement either. Don't know. Yep. So now you have science weighing in, but it's not 100% science because it's not provable.
Right. Has it been spread and see?
May we not know the answer for a very long time.
That's right. Let's continue having the conversation for another 200 years.
At least 120.
Or at least
120.
120.
Am I being greedy?
And let's have a conversation sometime face to face.
That would be great. Next week, we'll continue with the Kedusha. As we talked about God in history, God in nature, and God in the Kedusha, you have essentially the ineffable, that which of God which is beyond comprehension. And we'll continue on from there. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week.
Enjoy your visit. Enjoy your stay.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Thank you, Michael, for getting us on.
Thank you. Thank you for being there.
Thank you.
Thank
Enjoy your
you.
vacation.
Bye, guys.
Yeah, enjoy. Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you.